Let me start with one simple word today. Why? Midjourney version 7 has gotten its first update and it remains complex. I'll show you what's new and compare it to the ChatGPT Image Generator. The results are not in Midjourney's favor. I have to honestly admit that I'm starting to falter with Midjourney. Why? The developers of the AI platform are already seeing the need to make updates to things that were only introduced with the release a few days ago. It almost seems as if a half-finished product has been thrown onto the market and the user is now paying the price. Also, it was obviously not considered necessary to test the interface internally in advance. There is no other way to explain this in and out. Well, as a paying user, you have to accept that for now. So let me show you the latest changes. The most important modification is the user guidance in the prompt bar. P for personalize has been retained. Instead of the word draft mode, we now see a lightning bolt symbol. Draft mode can be switched on and off. If I click on it, the icon is highlighted in red and draft mode is switched on. As long as this is activated, only concept images, let me call them like this, are created. This process is faster, but the image quality is poorer. You can now also switch on the so-called conversational mode. This means that you can further refine the last image you created. I did this in the example of this kitten. Instead of a green box, I wanted a red box. It was also possible to change the red box into a blue one. As you can see, it actually works very well. If you want, you can also start the voice mode. Simply click on the microphone icon. However, as the name suggests, this requires a microphone. I was quite confused about one thing in this context. If I have activated draft mode, but not conversational mode at the same time. I tried this once with the prompt, "A mouse in the house." Then further refinement of the images no longer works. This means, at least in my experience, that if you want to adjust images further, you always have to activate both modes, regardless of whether you use your keyboard or a microphone for input. Which makes the entire process even more confusing. Do we now always have to work in draft mode to avoid wasting our fast hours? And what about this enhance function? Previously it was on the far right. Now you can find this feature on every image created with draft mode. It's all rather bewildering. The same applies to these images, which I created using draft mode, but not conversational mode. There we find the enhance function again. What, dear Midjourney team, is the difference between these three buttons: very subtle, very strong, and enhance? Of course I tested this. Here is the result of enhance, here of very subtle, and here of very strong. Very strong is clear. The image shows clear changes. With very subtle, it's more difficult. Let me compare it directly with enhance. What is the difference? Why is there an enhance button if it produces almost the same result as very subtle? Buttons with different names but the same result don't really make much sense. In addition to the modified features, the direct comparison between the ChatGPT Image Generator and Midjourney was also very important to me. To do this, I created normal images in the first step and used the retexture function in the second step. Since I needed a few historical images from the time of the American Civil War for a project with Runway Gen 4, these were the first pictures. On the left are always the results of ChatGPT. On the right, the results of Midjourney with exactly the same prompt. You will immediately notice that the ChatGPT results are very consistent. The colours also match the year 1863. The images on the right, on the other hand, are from Midjourney. They appear relatively arbitrary. The type of realisation varies between photorealistic and painted. The next examples also follow this impression. Top left a general of the Union Army, bottom left the warship during the landing. Interestingly, although I have not mentioned it, the ship corresponds exactly to the model from the previous picture. To the right are the results from Midjourney. The pictures of Midjourney are, if you look at them individually, certainly relatively well realised. But here too, you get the impression of a kind of arbitrariness. The next example's on the left. The colour scheme is consistent, and the prompt adherence is very strong. ChatGPT also manages to realize unusual photorealistic images, as we can see in the example of the Confederate general holding the kitten. Again, to the right are the realizations of Midjourney, here too relatively incoherent and random. In this context, however, it was much more important to me to check how the retexture function works in Midjourney. I'm sure you all know the great results you can achieve with the ChatGPT Image Generator. Just think of the realization with the Studio Ghibli style, or the realization of these action figures in the blister packaging. I was quite surprised at what I found out. I almost want to use the word worrying. For this, let's call it style test. I used this already familiar image of the Confederate general. The prompt was, change the style of this image to X. X stands for the style of your choice. Of course, it was important that I used exactly the same prompt for both AI platforms. Otherwise, a test would not work. Top left, the realization of ChatGPT as a Simpsons comic. Top right, the realization of Midjourney as a Simpsons comic. Bottom left, the realization of ChatGPT as a South Park illustration. Bottom right, the realization of Midjourney as a South Park illustration. As you can easily see, Midjourney does everything but what was required in the prompt, not to mention the quality of the images. In the next example, top left, pop art, and bottom left, the illustration as a Lego figure. On the right, again the very poor results of Midjourney, whatever that is supposed to be. In the last example, we see the result using watercolours at the top left and a very special attempt at the bottom left. Since ChatGPT delivers such great images, this time we had to find a very special illustration style. When ChatGPT was asked, name me a very unusual graphic style, the answer came promptly. Traditional Wali art from Maharashtra, India. This shows fine white lines on an ochre-coloured background. As you can see from the image on the bottom left, the ChatGPT Image Generator is once again best in class. That's just impressive. Now please look to the right. Actually, I would like to say that these results are just ridiculous. This smearing at the top right, and whatever that is supposed to be, that we see at the bottom right. It's incomprehensible. My impression, the prompt adherence in Midjourney is pretty arbitrary. Texts in the image rarely work, if at all. Some individual images are implemented in an interesting way. Well, let's hope for further updates and significant improvements. In the current version, Midjourney is more a source of frustration than fun. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening. See you soon. Your channel, AI, Now You Know.